Max Weinbach recently posted some iPhone 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max alleged schematics, and why do I believe these in particular? Well, because they're the bearer of bad news, and there's not the same kind of fake stuff that would be flying around out there for someone to just drag some attention to themselves. And whenever it sounds like disappointment and like, oh god, I really hope that's not real, it's usually those rumors that end up being real. Let's begin. So, I hate being that guy who says, I told you so, all the time. Who am I kidding? This is kind of fun. But, back last year, when we got that huge iPhone 14 leak drop talking about how Apple was ditching the notch and they're getting rid of the camera bump, I thought something sounded just a little bit too fishy, in my opinion, because I knew from the get-go, Apple does not have camera bumps just for the sake of, we like camera bumps. Camera bumps are a functional thing. Companies have to include those on their phone in order to accommodate certain features like optical image stabilization or capturing more light or having bigger lenses so that you get more depth data when you're taking pictures. So the idea that we were just gonna go from the gigantic camera bump on the 13 Pro and then next year it was just suddenly going to completely be gone because phone thicker now, yeah, I didn't really see that as being a likely scenario, and I expressed that as those leaks were dropping last year. Now we're finally getting some schematics that are a bit more realistic and I think believable, because Apple has to send out these schematics to case manufacturers to let them know what to design for. Every single year, we always see case companies come out with fairly accurate case designs months before the iPhones actually launch. And I know it feels like we just had iPhone season, but we're technically less than 6 months away from the iPhone 14s being unveiled. So this is the time of year where Apple has to kind of start finalizing these designs. And according to these schematics, the iPhone 14 is actually going to be the heaviest, thickest iPhone ever made. If you thought the 13 series was bad, this is apparently getting even worse, which is once again making me kind of grateful. I was not planning on upgrading this year, and I definitely want to keep holding on to my iPhone 13 for a tad longer now, because at least with the first schematic he posted, the iPhone 14 Pro Max is a little bit thicker on the chassis side than the 13 Pro Max, and then the camera bump basically gets 5% larger across the board. So the camera bump takes up more space on the back of the phone. It's also thicker than the 13 Pro Max camera bump. So I already thought the wobble was pretty dang bad on my 13 Pro Max because I'm a caseless guy and I do often set my phone down on a table or something, and it makes a pretty chonk, you know, blum, 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 every time I tap on it. And I can understand why a lot of people get cases just for that reason alone. Sounds like Apple doesn't care about that complaint. If anything, requiring people or encouraging people to buy a case means Apple sees better sales and better revenue because they're like, oh god, this camera bump is so big, let me get a case for it. So there's honestly very little incentive for Apple to get rid of it, but there's certainly incentive to upsell people on better cameras and camera improvements, which I'm sure that's kind of the silver lining of this upgrade, right? The 14 Pro Max, if the camera bump is larger, that proves there's some more validity to the 48 megapixel sensor being real, the sensors themselves capturing more depth, better low light performance, better image stabilization. So absolutely expect the cameras to be improved on the iPhone 14 Pro Max, but at what cost? You know, how much thicker do these bumps have to get? Well, I've actually talked about that in previous videos as well, but it's kind of limited by MagSafe. So these big metal rings on the back of the iPhone are already pushing up against the 13 Pro's camera bump, and some accessory makers have struggled to make MagSafe accessories that work on the iPhone 13 Pro because of how big the bump is. But that's where I've got some even more bad news from this same leak from Max Weinbach. The regular iPhone 14 Pro, the one that's just 6.1 inches, is also rumored to get thicker than the 13 Pro, and also the camera bump will take up even more space on the back. So I know this looks like a meme and this looks ridiculous, but these are the exact same leaks and rumors that were happening last year, and everyone was like, what? You can't make the camera bump bigger. It's already huge on the 12 Pro. There's no way that, oh no. And then the 13 Pro launched, it was like, wow, okay, this is comically large. And I tried to warn people last year. I was like, hey guys, as long as Apple can stuff better hardware for the camera in there, I think they're gonna keep going. And that's what these schematics are alluding to. And because they sound like bad news and they sound like a disappointment for many, that's why I think these aren't fake. These probably are fairly legit. And that means that getting MagSafe accessories to work on the 14 Pro might get increasingly more difficult. Like only a handful of cases changes from Apple will actually work, but a lot of Mophie MagSafe charging stuff, that's just gonna not align with the camera bump very well, and MagSafe Duo will probably still remain to be kind of clunky. I feel particularly bad if you're the kind of person in the market for a 6.1-inch Pro iPhone. You want the best camera possible, but you don't want the CHONK phone of the Max. You might be chonked out of certain accessories out there because of these schematics, especially if they end up being real. But yeah, the 14 Pro Max is just gonna have an even more comically large camera, and I'm sure it will come with some improvements. You'll get better night mode performance, and you'll get a lot more detail out of both pictures and videos. It's just, man, this is the first thing people notice whenever I hand them my 13 Pro Max, by the way. So I love my phone. I'm still very happy with it. Like, I don't think the wobble is a deal breaker. I'm not gonna upgrade my iPhone, even if by some miracle the iPhone 14 ends up eliminating the camera bump. But whenever I hand my phone off to someone, that's always their first thing, is like, oh my god, this camera bump is huge. Yeah, it's worth it because the camera's great and I'm happy with the performance of the camera, but this trend has really shown no signs of slowing down ever since the camera bump was introduced in 2014. It has only gotten worse. The bump gets more prominent, it gets bigger, Apple drives more attention to it, and that's why in 2022 I did not expect that to all turn around magically just because Apple's like, well, okay, enough people don't like it. They don't care about the tech community. They care about the average consumer. Average consumer is gonna buy a case. They just want a better camera at the end of the day. As much as I appreciate Apple trying to make the battery life better and stuff better and better hardware in the phone, I still am really hoping they don't use stainless steel on the Pro options, because I think one of the few complaints I have with my 13 Pro Max is it's quite heavy. It's the heaviest iPhone to ever exist, and especially when I use it with one hand for extended periods, I start to miss my iPhone 12 mini a little bit, but not enough for me to settle with a 60 hertz display. I would still much rather have 120 hertz at the end of the day, so I'll put up with the heavy iPhone, but if you could just bring either titanium or aluminum to the chassis of the Pro iPhones, that would make them so much lighter and easier to hold. But knowing this is Apple, nah, they're probably gonna recycle their old manufacturing lines as much as possible, which means, yeah, iPhone 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max, they're probably gonna be the heaviest iPhones ever. Rest in peace, one-handed users. Let me know what you guys think of these leaked schematics. Do you think they're legit, or do you still have a little glimmer of hope that they're going to flatten out the camera bump on the back and somehow just make it look like an Energizer phone? All that false hope, let me know what you're thinking down in the comments below. This is your Alp Sheep here. I'll see you all in the next one.